All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It is now 4:04. I believe there are still members of our Public Advisory Work Group committee that are going to be joining us, hopefully. But in the interest of time, I will go ahead and formally begin the Public Advisory Work Group meeting. I did want to say welcome and thank you for joining us this afternoon for the April meeting of our ERC Public Advisory Work Group. The meeting is going to be held via Zoom video teleconference, and we'll do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting. I also wanted to mention that this meeting will be recorded and will be posted on the district's website at a later time. And then also for those who are in attendance, you may notice that there is a notification that this meeting is being live streamed. I did want to mention that this is only for internal purposes only, and it's not formally being live streamed at this point, but we are testing out some live streaming functions, but I did want to mention that. Before we officially begin, I did want to review some general information and instructions for the meeting. First off, only Public Advisory Work Group members and district staff will be visible on this Zoom. I also wanted to ask that you please silence your cell phones and other communication devices, such as your desk phone, to ensure that we're not having or hearing any feedback that can interrupt the meeting. For work group members, be sure you're muted on Zoom unless you wish to comment or ask a question. We'll also, for the work group members, please feel free to stop us at any time during the presentation if you have any comments or questions in regards to what we are presenting this afternoon. We will open up the meeting at various points throughout the presentation and at the end for additional work group members and public participation for comments and questions. For the members of the public that are participating via Zoom, please use the raise hand button so that you may be recognized to speak during the comment periods. And then for those members who are participating via teleconference, please use the *9 button to raise your hand to be recognized to speak during the comment periods. Our staff will call out on you using the last 4 digits of your phone number when it's your turn to speak. You can utilize the *6 button to mute and unmute yourself. So with that, can we go ahead and put the presentation on the screen, please? I will begin our presentation portion. So again, thank you for joining us for the April 7th ERC Public Advisory Work Group meeting. We'll be going over a number of topics this afternoon. First one will be to discuss the new ERC Public Advisory Work Group webpage. Then we'll discuss recent board actions regarding NOx offsetting requirements. We'll move on to identifying the progress that the district has made in fulfilling commitments in response to the CARB, or California Air Resources Board, ERC review. We'll next go over amendments to the district's NSR rules, and then we'll go ahead and conclude the meeting after those slides. So in regards to the new ERC PAW webpage, this was a webpage that has been recently launched. The link is available on the presentation. The webpage will serve as a landing page, which will include the ERC PAW schedule, agendas, presentations, and links to other related board actions, workshops, and other relevant material and information. As I mentioned earlier, we want to close that. Sorry. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording, and the PAW webpage will include the recordings for this meeting and future meetings. Here is just a brief screenshot of the new ERC Public Advisory Work Group landing page. As you can see, there's a brief discussion of the PAW committee or the PAW work group. There are links to the side that will bring you to the roster, the meeting schedules, agendas, presentations, and other associated documents. So before I move on to the next topic, I wanted to open this up and pause for questions or any questions from the members of the Public Advisory Work Group Committee. Stephanie, do you see anybody? Okay, no one, no questions there. How about any members of the public? Any questions or comments in regards to these first few slides associated with the Public Advisory webpage? I'm not seeing any hands raised or any indications via teleconference. Okay. Well, we will have multiple times for comments and questions. So if you do have any questions that may arise, please just let us know. Moving on to the next topic in regards to recent board actions associated with NOx offsetting requirements. So in order to ensure compliance with federal obligations, in the 2020-2021 offset equivalency report, the district identified a NOx shortfall in the offset quantity test, or what we referred to as Test 1. Offset quantity equivalency for NOx was maintained using the district's carryover balance, and so we were able to demonstrate equivalency. However, the annual shortfall in the quantity of NOx offsets highlights the possibility that the current remedy that's included in District Rule 2201 will not or does not ensure the district will be able to remain equivalent with federal offsetting requirements. So on February 17th of this year, 2022, the district governing board took action to effectively end programmatic federal offset equivalency for NOx. What does that mean? It means that all new major sources or federal major modifications triggering offsets for NOx now are required to provide ERCs to satisfy the federal offset obligations at the project level. And again, reminder that those would have to be surplus at time of use ERCs. And then I did want to mention that the district is no longer operating an offset equivalency system for both NOx and VOC. VOC had happened in the prior years. So that concludes this portion of my presentation. We'll go ahead and open up for any comments in regards to the recent actions with associated with the NOx offsetting requirements. We can open it up to the PAW members. Any comments or questions from any members of the Public Advisory Work Group? Okay, still not seeing or hearing any. Any members of the public, please raise your hand or use the *9 function. Okay, we still don't have any. All right, I will move on to, excuse me, the next section where we'll discuss the progress the district has been making in fulfilling our commitments in response to the CARB ERC review. So to begin, CARB's review pointed out to the district the need to revisit and potentially enhance aspects of the ERC and offset equivalency program moving forward. Based on their recommendations, the district committed to, enhancing transparency and taking specific actions to enhance aspects of the ERC and offset equivalency program. Through this time, significant action has been taken since the release of the report to fulfill our commitments, and I'll go into details based on the commitments the district had made. One commitment was to conduct a public workshop each year, beginning with the 2019-2020 equivalency demonstration, to present and discuss the equivalency report prior to taking it to the district's governing board. So the district held public workshops on November 5th of 2020. That workshop was presented to discuss the draft results associated with the 2019-2020 report. And then we also held a workshop on October 26th of 2021 to discuss the draft results of the 2020-2021 annual equivalency report. Those workshops allowed for review and comment on the draft demonstrations prior to finalizing the reports, submitting the final reports to EPA and ARB, and taking the final report for our governing board's approval. Another commitment was to enhance the annual demonstration report to make the report more understandable, beginning with the 2019-2020 equivalency demonstration. This was also to include a more fully characterizing adjustments made year to year on our carryover banks in order to ensure the public can better understand all of the adjustments that were made for each of those tracking years. And then based on stakeholder suggestions for making the report easier to understand, the district has made significant enhancements to both the 2019-2020 report and the 2020-2021 equivalency demonstration reports. And we appreciate all of the input that the stakeholders have given us to make those reports more clear and easier to understand. We also enhanced the report by providing detailed explanations of the methodology used to assess offset equivalency. The next commitment was to convene a public advisory work group consisting of affected stakeholders, including community-based organizations, regulated valley businesses, citizens advisory committee members, the EPA and ARB, all to assist the district in developing solutions related to the district's equivalency system. So the public advisory work group was created by the board in late August of 2020, and our initial kickoff meeting was held on September of 2020. The Public Advisory Work Group provides a forum for discussion and suggestions to assist the district in developing solutions and enhancements related to our ERC and offset equivalency systems, and to hear perspectives and receive input on the systems from our stakeholders. To date, we have held 11 meetings, and today's meeting, April 7th, is the 12th meeting. One more commitment was to adjust calculated emissions reductions from all affected agricultural internal combustion engine conversion incentive program, or Ag-ICE projects, to reflect appropriate load factors. Additionally, another commitment was to analyze the orphan shutdown projects identified by the California Air Resources Board and make adjustments to those reductions as appropriate. Based on this commitment, on September 17, 2020, the district governing board proactively withdrew the emissions reductions calculated from the Ag-ICE and orphan shutdowns from the district's offset equivalency system. What that meant was that board action required the enactment of District Rule 2201 remedies as the district was no longer to demonstrate equivalency with the surplus value test, or test 2, for both NOx and VOC. Another commitment was to update the district's policies pertaining to the quantifications of emissions reductions from orphan shutdowns, and to ensure procedures and associated staff training to maintain consistency with NSR, or the District Rule 2201 criteria for accreditability of emissions reductions. The district did not include any new orphan shutdown reductions in the equivalency system since the 2020 September 2020 removal. Also, as mentioned earlier, we did remove all existing orphan shutdown reductions from our offset equivalency system. At this point, the district is currently evaluating the development of mechanisms and methodologies for the use of these and other types of creditable reductions, i.e., again, future orphan shutdowns and even potentially mobile source emissions reductions. Additionally, to enhance consistency, the district has assigned and trained a group of staff that are now exclusively responsible for overseeing the efforts associated with ERC issuances and use and offset equivalency. Oh, we have a question?
Yeah, thank you. Can you clarify that ag ice projects? So you said those were all removed proactively, and now the district is no longer considering ways to incorporate those, or is that what part of the mobile source strategy or mobile source emission reduction generation?
Yeah, there is no consideration for the ag ice projects that were removed from the offset equivalency system. They are not associated with the mobile source reductions moving forward.
And so the district's no longer considering incorporating those going forward. Not just the ones that were removed, but like new ones, right?
Yes, there's no intent to consider any future ag ice programs, not at this time.
But you're still trying to figure out a way to potentially reincorporate future orphan shutdowns. Is that right?
Yeah. Okay. Yes. Thank you. Any other questions before I move on to the next slides? Okay. Catherine, did you have a question?
Yeah, thank you. It's actually on the next slide, if you don't mind going ahead.
Sure. So so this was a slide that I just covered in regards to future orphan shutdowns.
The district commitment slide that was just up about the staff training was the one that I had the question about. Yes, this one exactly. So at the bottom it says, to enhance consistency, district has assigned and trained a group of staff that are now exclusively responsible for overseeing efforts. Could you just describe a bit more like what type of training, how many staff, and has the tracking database also been updated, or do you know when that's going to happen?
So the next slide will discuss the tracking database. But the staff training is a group of, we have how many engineers? 3 engineers associated with that, with myself being the manager and Brian next to me being the director, related to overseeing those efforts. We have, again, gone through the comments and the ERC review that was performed by the California Air Resources Board and have revised policies and procedures to ensure that we are processing projects as they have identified some of those areas that needed improvement. And again, we have also implemented the federal system for both NOx and VOC, and we'll be implementing the federal program for all projects moving forward.
Thank you. That's the only question I have for right now.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. And so I will move on to the next slide, which does, I guess, hit upon the second part of Catherine's. The commitment was associated with developing a new equivalency tracking database and including associated documentation. So the district will begin in the development of a new database and associated tracking infrastructure once an approvable path forward is developed with CARB and ARB. Also associated is the district's NSR and ERC banking rules that need to be amended accordingly. So it's a work in progress. We are definitely looking forward to finding that approvable path with CARB and CARB and EPA inputs. But at this point, we are just in the development stages of that new equivalency tracking database. Okay. So actually, this is the end of the district commitment slides. And so we'll open it up for any additional comments or questions. And we'll begin with the PAW members. Okay. So we do have a question from Jesus.
Hey, good afternoon. I had a quick clarifying question for the ag ice and the orphan shutdowns. they were removed on all the banks, or just the two that failed?
So they were removed from our equivalency offset equivalency system.
Okay, and then did the other banks also go through a review process that we saw in the NOx and the VOCs? And if not, is there going to be?
I'm not sure exactly what you mean. The other pollutants?
Yeah, the other pollutants and the equivalency. Yeah, and the equivalency demonstrations.
So the other pollutants, I mean, we were working off of the ARB or the CARB ERC review, and the other pollutants were not identified as part of that review process. And if they were, we did consider any comments or suggestions associated with that ARB ERC review.
Okay, and then I guess the last question I had was, and I think I've probably asked this before, is how the discrepancies that we saw in NOx and VOCs, do we have an understanding of, overall the amount of those discrepancies, what impact they've had on our air quality levels overall?
So at this point, the district has addressed those potential shortfalls by taking a series of actions to end the equivalency for NOx and VOC. And of course, we've begun requiring the federal offsetting obligations for each individual project. So any projects moving forward involving those will be required to provide the federal offsetting requirements. That also includes those credits to be surplus at time of use. We don't believe that it's feasible to try to reevaluate 20 years worth of ERCs and ATCs and orphan shutdowns and ag engine projects. And so due to this infeasibility, we haven't evaluated those impacts and associated with some of those, what you're identifying with, I guess, lack of better term, deficit.
Then is there any chance of I just lost the word, remediation, some sort of payback for the community members or for the communities that have been told that the levels of contaminants were decreasing over time, and it wasn't exactly as it was said?
I'm not 100% sure what you mean by that. Again, the district's inventory has been decreasing over time, as can be seen in our attainment planning processes. So I'm not exactly sure what you intend or your question is trying to get at.
Let me find a better way to reword it, and I'll get back to you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Catherine?
Yeah, thanks. I think if I could follow up a bit on the line of thinking or questioning that I think Jesus was on about potential negative impacts to air pollution. So to make sure that I'm following the process correctly, it's my understanding that if the system had been managed according to the rules, that the equivalency demonstration probably would have failed several years before it was actually caught by the Air Resources Board program review, which, if I understand the way that the rules work correctly, that would have meant that in that time period that permits were being issued that had credits in them that were potentially not at the correct value because the system hadn't been corrected yet. So the outstanding question that I have is, understanding that you all have said multiple times that you don't have the staff capacity to go back. over the last 20 years and assess everything, there is particularly this window where the system was not in equivalency, but the permits were still going out. So in my mind, that's where damage happened to communities where pollution levels were higher than what they should have been if the system was managed correctly. So is there any way in which the Air District is looking to address that?
This is Brian Clements. Yeah, no, I mean, currently, as Errol mentioned, you know, we're not intending to look back on those projects. You know, we're committed to taking numerous steps moving forward to enhance our program, fulfilling all the commitments mentioned in the presentation today. You know, we're looking forward to evaluating additional enhancement opportunities through the Rule 2201 amendment process, in which will be a full public process, and we'll be taking a deeper dive into Rule 2201. You know, covering issues related to ERCs and equivalency. We've committed, and as you've heard, we've removed the equivalency program completely for NOx and VOCs. So we're really just intending to build off all the questions and lessons learned from ARB's review to enhance and clarify aspect of the program moving forward.
Okay, so I have two follow-up questions related to that. One is, again, making sure that I understand the way that the rules work correctly. I get right now that NOx and VOC are out of equivalency and that credits used today have to be valued at the time that they are used and not when they were issued. However, if I understand the rules correctly, at least in theory, in the future, the Air District could return to equivalency, which would then make all the old credits in the bank have the value that they had when they were issued again. First of all, is that a correct understanding? And second of all, does the district have any plans to return the system to equivalency?
So to answer that question, your first part of the question, the way the current rule is written is there is language in there that allows for a system that was demonstrated to not be equivalent to come back. That is currently in the rule. And as Brian had mentioned in the next slides that I'll be going over, is we are making amendments to District Rule 2201 to address a number of different issues. So that could be part of what the district does, is revising language that's currently within the rules and making revisions according to stakeholder comments and or again, enhancements associated with our offset equivalency and our ERC programs. So yes, as the rule currently is written. As far as intent to go back into the system, I don't know if we can answer that question. We will be working to ensure that we're implementing the federal program. If there are credits that are identified to make the system whole, then the opportunity could be there the way the rule is currently written. I don't think the district has plans one way or the other to try to make the system whole for NOx or VOC. We are looking for, at least moving forward, as we've presented in numerous public advisory work group meetings, we're looking for ways to identify new emission reduction credits in order to allow for projects to keep happening, because the credits are going to be, as we've mentioned, potential have a shortfall for projects in the future. So that, I mean, we would have to identify above and beyond credits in order to make the system whole.
Right. Thanks for that explanation. Just want to make sure I'm tracking correctly. And it sounds like what you just mentioned is that there's going to be some additional slides to discuss some of the potential changes to Rule 2201. So I can reserve my questions for after we go through those slides, since that may cover it. Also just wanted to put in a plug that I would also like to be able to briefly comment about some of the changes to the public process before the meeting ends. But in the interest of equity of airtime, I'll hold the rest of my questions for now. Thanks.
Okay, yeah, it's appreciated, and definitely we'll have additional time after all of the slides. So if you wanted to bring up your additional questions then, Catherine, thank you. Okay, Sasan?
Hey, thanks. I'm getting a little notice that my connection is unstable. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Yeah, okay. So I see in the slides going forward, and I think the next agenda item, we're going to talk about amendments to Rule 2301 that are intended to ensure the ERC program is real, permanent, quantifiable, surplus, enforceable. Besides the orphan shutdowns and the Ag Eyes projects that were removed, I know CARB's review was only a sample, but were there other projects that I understood the review to find that there were several projects that didn't meet these criteria or lacked the documentation to prove this criteria. If those were removed, is that, I guess, just for the 2019 and 2020 demonstration, or were they for the 2020 and 2021 equivalency demonstration as well? And I guess I'm wondering, I think I just want to better understand if we saw projects that didn't meet those criteria, which ones they were, and what the failure was, which of those criteria they failed, so that we can be better informed for the amendment process going forward. And I have one other question, but I want to see if there's an answer to that first.
Yeah, this is Brian. The ARB's review identified, or went through numerous sample projects. I believe 50 something, and did a detailed review of those. There was a few questions that came out of those projects, those sample projects, such as timeliness of ERC banking application submittal. There's questions about load or source shifting, and then a couple of the questions. So those are the type of things, if there's ambiguity in the rule and or our policies, that's what we're looking to address moving forward with the 2201 amendment and related policy. Those questions and primary issues identified in the audit will be the focus of that process moving forward.
Okay, yeah, because in the review it says they identified 15 of the 52 projects didn't meet the ERC timeliness requirements. 4 of the 52 reviews didn't meet the requirements for being surplus, and so just to confirm, those have all been removed from all banks, or they only were removed from the Knox and VOC banks?
So those projects weren't removed from the Knox Bank or the offset equivalency system. Only the Ag Ice and the historical orphan shutdowns were removed from our system. For the I guess the question associated with the timeliness and what they had identified, the district believes that all of those ERC applications were submitted within the timeframes of our rule, given our long-standing interpretation of the unclear verbiage that was included or contained within 2301, the ERC banking rule. That policy is not consistent with our understanding of how other districts have also established application timelines. As a part of this, prior to all of those, all of those projects had gone through EPA and ARB review, and we didn't receive comments from them regarding that policy interpretation. So there were no changes that were made associated with that portion of the CARB audit when ARB had finalized their review. Our goal is, as Brian was saying, to revisit that policy and clarify any of those ambiguity conditions or requirements within the rule development process. Therefore, hopefully clarifying the issue and not having these types of potential questions in the future.
So is it reasonable for us to request, or is this something that the district or CARB or EPA could do to just quantify the impact it would have if you, it sounds like you're saying that you have a difference of opinion about how this rule needed to be implemented in the past. It sounds like also at least 4 of them, CARB's audit says they were not surplus of federal, state, or district law. So it wasn't just the timeliness interpretation part, but there was a question about whether they were surplus. Even if you're not willing to remove them from the Knox Bank, could we at least get a quantification of the shortfall or the difference that this would have had if you had been interpreting it consistent with what CARB and EPA considered to be the correct interpretation?
I don't know if I can speak to any future actions. Again, we're focused on moving forward with the rule amendment process to get District Rule 2201 and District Rule 2301 amended to provide that clarity. Again, we have responded to the CARB audit and the ERC review with our formal letter. I know ARB had taken that letter to their board, and we've gone over those various commitments. And so our goal is to keep moving forward associated with ways to improve and refine the current ERC system and our offset equivalency systems. Any other comments before we move forward? Okay, we do have some public comments.
Cynthia for public comment.
Hello, Cynthia Pinto Cabrera with CVAC Policy Assistant. I just had a quick kind of clarifying question following up what Jesus was talking about on the equivalency demonstration. So we only looked at the Knox and VOC. You guys only looked at the Knox and the VOC banks, but I was wondering if you had any intention of looking into the other remaining banks like PM10, PM2.5, SOX, and greenhouse gas, and if you weren't, what was the reasoning behind that?
So again, we focused on what was identified in the CARB ERC review. And the other point that I guess I needed to emphasize is we review all of those equivalency banks as a part of our reports on an annual basis. The significant difference between the VOC and the NOx compared to the other pollutants of PM10, SOX, and CO is in relation to the offset thresholds and the federal requirements or the federal thresholds. Because we are extreme ozone, the offset thresholds for NOx and VOC are identical. But for the other pollutants, for SOX, PM10, and CO, the offset thresholds locally at the district level are a lot more stringent than the federal requirements. For example, the PM10 offset threshold is 29,200 pounds per year before you trigger offsets. And the federal offset threshold, if I can recall, I think is 70 tons or 140,000 pounds a year. So the district rule is significantly more stringent, and the district's offset program for PM10 and SOX and CO are more stringent than the federal offsetting programs, and we have that buffer. Again, the NOx and VOC, due to the extreme designation, where the offset thresholds were equivalent to the federal thresholds of 10 tons. That was the significance associated with having to evaluate those pollutants a lot more closely.
Thank you.
We have Jasmine for public comment.
Hi, good evening. Jasmine Martinez, Kern County resident and coordinator with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition. In your presentation, and I think it was on slide 11, you mentioned that the district has made the equivalency report demonstrations more understandable. And I've had a chance to review the past reports, and as someone who is fluent in English and holds a higher education degree, I did find these difficult to read and full of technical jargon. So I would just really like to return to that slide and see if you can speak to some of the ways the district has updated its reports for the public to be able to access them.
So give me a second. So slide 11, more. We don't have the actual reports in front of us, but you're correct. This slide does talk about how the district had made significant enhancements. And so we do feel the 2019 report and also the new 2020-2021 report have improved in trying to provide a better explanation on what the methodologies were used and how we got the numbers that show up in the table. We are more than happy to make additional revisions. This is a living document, and if you have suggestions on areas that aren't clear to you or have suggestions on ways that we can make it more clear, I guess what I would say is if you looked at the years prior to the 2019-2020 or the 2020-2021, those reports are, if you found these reports hard to understand, those reports were also even more lacking. And so we have included a lot of language trying to walk through, trying to include charts and tables that can be replicated, where the previous reports, you kind of had to understand more of the internal workings in order to calculate and determine what numbers were appropriate. So the district is more than happy to try to find ways to make it even more clear. This unfortunately is a very technical report because it's associated with projects and equivalency and calculations and ERCs and what ERCs are used and where they're used and how much of it is used in which quarters. So I don't know how to necessarily make a technical report less technical, but we can try to provide additional information and additional language that will walk you through and help explain how those numbers are derived and how those tables are generated. And so, again, if you have suggestions that we can utilize, we would love to hear from you and see if there's ways that we can continually improve and work on and maybe see in this next 2021-2022 offset report year.
Yeah, thank you for that breakdown. It's unfortunate to hear that the previous reports were even more just not as accessible. And I do think I would encourage the district to go beyond the reports, especially when it comes to thinking about the particular communities that a lot of these broken credits have ended up in. So whether that is doing public workshops, just being creative about the different ways you're sharing information, even if it does have to become part of a technical report, it can always become a presentation. It can always become a partnership with the community-based organization to get information out. So just really encourage those methods as well.
We absolutely agree. The other point that I wanted to make is we do have that new ERC Public Advisory Working Group webpage, which will include prior presentations, the previous 11 public advisory work group meetings, we did have a lot of other presentations that walk through various details. And so I would also suggest those who are interested, now that we have this webpage up, to utilize that as a resource and learn a little bit more about the intricacies and the technicalities associated with the annual report. And so I think it's a win-win overall, but we do agree, and we are here to work with interested stakeholders in order to continually make our equivalency demonstration even more clear into the future. So appreciate the comment.
Pedro for public comment.
Hello and happy Thursday, everyone. My name is Pedro Hernandez with the Central Valley Air Quality Coalition, and I'd like to make an observation and ask a question. So to maybe ground my comments, I'm trying to ask about the kind of difference of opinion over the interpretation of the rules. And to me, I'd like some clarification on why you are saying that the district believes it's infeasible to look back 20 years in the past, and also why your difference of opinion is correct, I guess, because it honestly feels as if not like you can't look back, but it's more of that you won't look back. And I would just, really like a on the record statement for, again, why it's seemingly so impossible to look back and assess the damage that has been caused by the air district's lack of accountability and suppression of, programs that could work if they were not otherwise under implemented and, without any loopholes as well too. So if you could comment on that, I think that would be appreciated for me as a member of the public and a long-standing resident of the San Joaquin Valley as well.
Yeah, so that's a good question. As mentioned, there's a few sets of questions if you want to categorize the questions or issues raised by ARB in the review, such as timeliness of the application, ERC banking application submittals. And there was mention of those ERCs being issued incorrectly. We don't know that any of them were issued incorrectly, and we don't see it that way. As Errol mentioned, we believe the ERC applications were submitted, according to our rule and in the timeframes given under our rule and as implemented by the district and other districts. That said, we're planning to update our Rule 2201 to clarify and our ERC banking rule to clarify that language and associated policies and implementation of that. And as far as the feasibility of looking back 20 years on or 30 years or more on projects that were ERCs that were banked in the 1980s, for example, in addition to staffing resources and associated with that, there's also, ERCs are vested property rights. There's issues with the taking of property. We're at this point we're not 100% sure what that would even look like. So there's in the subsequent actions associated with those ERCs and use of them and transfer of those ERCs and selling of those ERCs between individuals. So for these reasons, there was agreements and commitments made by the district, which we've gone over here today and numerous times. And so that's why we want to make sure that the process moving forward in banking ERC emissions is enhanced. And in fact, the rule requires a public process. It always has. each of the ERC banking actions goes out for 30-day public notice, in addition to being reviewed and approved by EPA and ARB prior to finalization. So the questions surrounding individual ERC banking actions are appropriate during those particular ERC banking processes at the project level.
I think we have another comment from Catherine.
Yeah, so a clarifying question along those lines, because again, if I'm hearing you all correctly, you're saying that there's total agreement on that the credits were always good, but there were some credits that EPA and CARB said shouldn't have been issued. And as was elaborated on just a few minutes ago, there was also disagreement over the way orphan shutdowns were credited and whether they should have been or not. So could representatives from CARB and EPA please clarify whether there is any policy disagreement still, or whether you agree with what I'm hearing from the EAR district, which is essentially all of the credits they have are totally fine and there's no outstanding questions about whether they passed the timeliness surplus, the 5-part test that they're supposed to pass that I'm sure you all know.
Hi, my name's Todd Schwartz. I'm Chief of CARB's Enforcement Division. I'll try to take a stab at an answer to that question. When we wrote the report, we evaluated a couple things. One, we looked at example ERCs that were where we were trying to look at whether or not as a whole there were issues associated with the issuance of some of those. And we did identify some of those issues, and they're identified in the report. We did not evaluate all of the ERCs that have been issued. And I know as it's been stated that, you know, CARB didn't comment on each of these ERCs as they were generated. There were some in the 80s where we did provide comments. It's noted in the report. You're talking about that now. But ultimately, you know, the responsibility for the proper issuance of ERCs and the proper calculation behind those does lie with the district, which has the authority over the implementation of their program. And so, in terms of looking forward versus backward, we did, in the process of discussing the report, work with the district on a set of actions that were designed to try to make sure that the program was put on a acceptable and proper direction moving forward. And that doesn't necessarily preclude the possibility of the district choosing to conduct additional analyses to try to answer questions from the public about the past implementation of their program and how that might impact air quality. So I think for the most part, you can go back and look at the report and you know, I can't go far beyond that, but hopefully this answer provides a little bit of additional clarity.
Yeah, and I'm happy to provide an EPA perspective. Laura Yannian is our ERC expert. I don't think she's joined us today, but I'll try to channel a little bit of Laura. I think what I understand is that, you know, going back and having a quantitative look back at all of the credits, you know, reconstructing that kind of history, when in fact, perhaps depending on when there were no more credits available, you know, certain credits, it's hard to know what the district would have done moving, like with each year had a certain situation been known. So you can't exactly go back and start from the beginning and say, okay, we can do this really quantitatively. So that we do at EPA agree that is a fairly problematic kind of challenge and not very straightforward. And I can ask Laura to join us at the next one to explain this a little bit better. I think the real value in understanding where the program had its challenges is, as Todd was saying, ensuring that in the future, you know, we have a much more transparent program where we, EPA, the state, the public can, you know, the oversight and transparency is better so that in case there is a misunderstanding about how implementation should happen, we all can get on the same page a lot quicker than we did. So, and that is typically the way, our programs kind of evolve over time. Is they're iterative. It's often hard to go back and redo things. So it's not generally the way our working relationship goes. We set out a program, we learn as we go, we make improvements. That's what rule revisions are all about. That said, I do, I would support some effort where we consider, are there certain areas, like as a general, not a quantitative, but perhaps a qualitative approach, is there some way that we can kind of have a sense certain areas perhaps might have been more impacted than other areas by the program? We wouldn't know how much, but maybe there are other things we can do in terms of dedicating some funding or some relief, some air quality improvements in a targeted fashion. And certainly I'd love to talk with my partner agencies and stakeholders, if that seems to make sense.
Thank you, Meredith and Todd. Catherine, did that hopefully answer portions of your questions?
Kind of, but I think I still didn't necessarily get a completely clear answer to whether there were actually credits that Carbon EPA didn't agree that the policy wasn't.
There were several credits in the report that when we went back and looked, Carbon expressed concerns about it at the time. And we did not evaluate all the credits that were generated, or nor did we look at all of the orphan shutdowns or electrification projects or what have you that were used in equivalency. So I can't say what is left in the system. I can't talk about other than what we evaluated and the trends that we saw in the evaluations that we did.
Yeah, and we're planning to take a little bit of a closer look at the report again. We're looking at Rule 2201. More we have an eye on, there are good lessons to be learned from the CARB audit, and we really appreciate the effort there, and especially the big push that came from CVAC and other stakeholders to make it happen. So we want to really see if we can get as much value out of that as we can in moving forward. While we're going through that, Catherine, I can circle back with you, or even at a PAW meeting, and let you know if we see anything where there's real disagreement in how the credits were handled.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you guys. No other comments at this point, so I will try to keep the meeting moving forward. If we can put the presentation back up. So I had ended on, I believe, slide 16. And now we're going to go over the discussions associated with the district's proposed amendments, or proposal to amend district NSR rules. I won't go into a lot of details here, but this slide just identifies the specifics associated with the district's new and modified stationary source of review rule, or District Rule 2201. The rule itself is designed to meet both federal and state NSR requirements, and there are a number of key elements that are included in Rule 2201, such as BACT, or Best Available Control Technology, the emissions offset thresholds and limits, federal offset equivalency requirements, and then public notification requirements. Again, I won't go into details. You can read up on those. As far as the amendments to the district NSR rule, or District Rule 2201, in accordance with the offset equivalency remedies contained within the current rule, the district must now amend 2201 requirements associated with federal offsetting for NOx and VOC. So on February 17th of 2022, just a couple months ago, the district's governing board directed staff to begin this rule amendment process. We will be conducting a comprehensive review of the rule to ensure ongoing conformance with state and federal NSR requirements. Some of the proposed amendments, of course, not limited to, will be looking at adopting the full federal offsetting program for any pollutant that fails to demonstrate equivalency with the federal offsetting requirements. And then again, that's currently applicable to both NOx and VOCs. We're looking to make amendments to various offsetting methodologies, exemptions and requirements, and amendments to existing equivalency remedies that will end up affecting PM10, PM2.5, SOX, and CO. Again, we're just at the beginning process, so we don't have any specific language, and we will be going through that comprehensive rule amendment process. The next rule that we're looking to include as a part of these amendments is amendments to District Rule 2301, our ERC banking rule. Those amendments are looking to ensure consistency in certifying that ERCs are real, permanent, quantifiable, surplus, and enforceable. Some of the potential amendments may include changes to administrative mechanisms, definitions, and procedures for the filing of applications and the banking of ERCs. Also, potentially including language for administrative mechanisms, definitions, and procedures for the banking of other creditable reductions, such as future orphan shutdowns and mobile source credits. So what we're wanting to do is hoping that we get a lot of public involvement through the rule development process. The first step in that process will be the public scoping meeting that we are intending to hold on Friday, April 15th at 2 p.m. Again, that's to discuss the potential amendments associated with District Rule 2201 and 2301. We have a link to the workshops page for that workshop. And again, the public advisory work group members and all interested stakeholders, we're hoping to be engaged throughout this rule amendment process. So that concludes the slides that we have right now for the rule amendment. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we are just in the beginning stages. We will have multiple opportunities for input as the actual language in the rule gets created. We will have staff reports, draft staff reports, and draft rule language for inspection, review, comment, and discussion moving forward. Any comments or questions at this time? Okay, Catherine?
Yeah, thank you for the update. I have a few comments that I was gonna pose as questions, but in the interest of time, since we're already a few minutes over, I'll just kind of reiterate some of the requests that we've made in the past in terms of how we can fix things in the future. So one is to remove the old credits that didn't follow the rules. Number two is to have expiration dates for credits that are newly issued. Number three would be to make the changes to the banking system, meaning following federal NSR, permanent, so that there is no opportunity to go back into equivalency and make all those old credits that are very problematic go back to having their old value. So those are just a few kind of early suggestions that CVAC members have mentioned multiple times before that I wanted to reiterate as this process moves forward. I also wanted to say, from a process perspective as a PAW member, I appreciate now that our meetings are being recorded. I think that that should be a best practice that the public shouldn't have to ask for. So I would encourage the Air District to approach all public facing meetings in that regard, that the meetings be recorded, that the materials be shared in advance, especially if I'm supposed to help advise you. It helps me to see what we're going to go over. And I think that we're on the path, but would appreciate having clear goals and expectations for what this group is doing and when. So all of that being said, I'm glad that those improvements and changes were made. I hope that they can be permanent. And frankly, I'm a bit disappointed to hear now that there is a workshop scheduled for like a week from now on a day that I'm not going to be able to make it. So would flag that if you want to be inclusive of your PAW members, that it would be helpful if you could consider our schedules and maybe give us more than a week of heads up.
Thank you. No other comments? Any comments from the public? Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and keep the meeting moving. As far as the next steps, we are looking to collaboratively work with the public stakeholders, EPA and ARB throughout this rule amendment process for District Rules 2201 and 2301. Again, the first step being the public scoping meeting. And then also we're looking to continue to identify and evaluate new methods to create surplus creditable emissions reductions. And so those are those potential future orphan shutdown reductions and potentially mobile source emissions reductions. So I will open up for one more last opportunity for comments and questions for members of the Public Advisory Work Group or the members of the public. Okay. Hearing and, oh, great.
Pedro
Hi.
for public comment.
Yes, thank you again. Fun meeting everyone. I'd like to maybe just ask, like, what does collaboratively mean as far as this process goes? You know, for example, during the last Air Pollution Control District board meeting, our organization requested that the Air District consider public health and the social costs of you know, pollution in the consideration of all rulemaking, and we haven't really heard a response from that. So, you know, what does collaboration mean, and could you maybe just explain that so we can all be on the same page about like what your good faith efforts will look like, because this is a very important process, and you know, I think we're all in this process to not waste our time. So could you just speak to that? Because I think a larger consideration, you know, is rebuilding the trust of the public and of the people that were adversely impacted by your failure to, you know, implement the programs in a way with integrity. So could you just speak to what a good faith collaborative process looks like?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Well, the entire process will be public. As mentioned, there's a scoping meeting, which we are, you know, we'll present the initial ideas, or the intent of the process, the intent of the rulemaking amendments, the background reasons, you know, for their and potential suggestions, any that we may have initially, but also the main purpose would be to open it up and receive comments and questions and take that input on you know, shaping the rule and procedures surrounding it and implementation moving forward. So each stage of the process, beginning with that scoping meeting, in addition to the following steps, you know, which will involve, you know, your response, us responding to any questions and comments, especially when received in written fashion, to the public and subsequent workshops that we'll have following the initial scoping meeting. I envision a series of workshops as we move along in the rulemaking process. And then in parallel, update the PAW here, this work group present anything that happened at the public scoping meetings or workshop meetings regarding the rulemaking. So we'll keep this committee abreast of any goings-ons with the rule amendments, and then basically it'll be you know, another opportunity for questions and comments and input and advisement on the, you know, enhancing our process and program moving forward.
Okay, seeing no other comments, I did want to thank you for joining us this afternoon. I will go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Appreciate you again joining us. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you, everybody.